Okay, so welcome to this podcast. I'm quite excited to interview Scotty. Had a quick read of his bio and thought, wow, fascinating life, fascinating guy. So I thought it'd be quite good to share your experiences really with our sort of audience. So to start with, Scotty, would you like to give your kind of bio, really, your kind of background, who you are, what you do, and your life story, because it's quite fascinating.
Thanks, man. I'll give you the overview so I don't monopolize the podcast for the first 20 minutes. I'll give you a 30-second overview and then you can feel free to dig down into whatever makes sense for you. I grew up on a very conservative evangelical Christian farm, homeschooled in North Carolina, like the southeast of the United States. Did not get out much. My first foray into the real world came when I went to West Point. So I spent 4 years at West Point, the United States Military Academy, became a military officer, got posted in the Army up to Alaska, where I promptly froze off a toe and a half due to frostbite. Very nearly
Wow.
died in the wilderness there. Yeah, it was a pretty devastating injury. It meant that I needed to learn how to walk again, and it also ended my military career. The frostbite injuries and hypothermia to that extent makes you very susceptible to getting it again. So the military was like, all right, Scotty, sorry, man, it's been great, but we're done. So I went into the corporate chemical oil field industry and sold at a professional corporate level, which is like the worst thing ever. Because as a military officer, I'd started to develop already a pretty bad alcohol habit. And here in the corporate world, they hand me a corporate expense card, say, go get people drunk. Okay, I did that. Did not do very well for my mental health or personal well-being. I get pretty frustrated with that after about a year and a half, 2 years. Went into entrepreneurship, built two of my own businesses, and quickly figured out that I didn't have the foundation in my life or my healing to really sustain that amount of money or success. The first business did pretty well. Second also did pretty well. But this is around 2015 at this time, and I've tried everything, right? I've tried the military, I've tried the corporate world, I've tried entrepreneurship, and nothing is making me happy. So I start traveling the world. I'm a semi-professional salsa dancer by this point. Not to throw too much information at you, but that was a way of recovering. I started to dance salsa, and that drew me to Latin America. Latin America was where I really started to understand community and family, and married my wife, who was Nutabe Indian. I was adopted into the Nutabe Indian tribe, and then started working with plant medicines. So I actually had started working with plant medicines a little bit before, and that led me into this whole ancestral healing and focus on indigenous issues. That's where I'm at today. I'm just trying to help people, man, and hopefully not spend 15 years of their life in a drunken stupor like I did, and maybe save a little bit of time along their journey.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you for doing that. And it's nice to be candid as well, Scotty. It's one of the things I quite liked about your bio and your profile really is how you're very open to talk about your experiences. Lots of people I think these days shut themselves away. They have problems with addictions in different ways and go through different life challenges and then kind of think they can't really air that publicly. But I think one of the good things these days is people are airing things publicly and saying, look, I've had a mental health challenge, I've had this problem or that problem, and this is how I kind of moved into a more positive place. And that I think is quite inspiring for other people that follow in your path that think, okay, here's someone that's been through similar things as me, that's popped out the other end, and obviously you've kind of moved away from your kind of native culture, I guess, into the indigenous culture, which is probably I'm assuming it was a big shock, was it, in terms of how they do things compared to what would have been your native kind of cultural choices and upbringing.
Yeah, well, I think the way that they do things is very different, but I think it's also a clue as to maybe how we could possibly do things different in our own lives. Like in the Western world, we're usually pretty stressed. We've got to focus on money and job. We're generally not very connected to our even nuclear family sometimes, and very few instances of where we're very connected to our extended family or community. And when you talk to the indigenous, they're interested in how you're eating, how you're sleeping, how your relationships are, how your words and thought patterns are. The real basic stuff, right? They're not waving crystals in the air. They're just sitting down, talking to each other and talking to nature. And what really was the hardest thing to understand about that culture was this idea of patience, right? In the Western culture, we want everything like right now, quick fixes, magic pills, that sort of thing. And sometimes you'll sit down with an elder and they'll look at the fire for 20 minutes before they say anything. And just that patience of not only communication, but also patience in terms of how does one improve your life? Well, daily habits step by step with a lot of patience. That was really difficult and still, honestly, sometimes remains difficult for me to understand. But I think it's a clue into why maybe they are happier in general.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you, actually. What is the main difference, do you think? I was going to say, I'm assuming that because they're connected to nature more than most people in the Western world, and I guess people coming from big cities that are living in that kind of urban environment there's no nature at all. I'm assuming that is the big kind of step change, really, that you've noticed coming from, again, more of a Western culture into that indigenous population.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things for sure. I mean, I'll give you a quick example. One of my friends, also a military veteran, was having a real difficult time with his first pregnancy. His wife was in, like, I think 4 weeks late in terms of past the due date. And they were like, we got to go to the hospital or something. And they called one of their elders, which is now one of our elders. He's actually talking on our community and educating people. He's a renowned doula. And he went over there, reviewed energetical, spiritual things about the baby, the mother, the husband, and said, let me go sit in nature and think for a little while. And he went and looked, spent about 4 hours, and he came back. He said, hey, the birds told me, because they flew in a particular pattern, the child's coming tomorrow. And so they had faith. Sure enough, child came the next day. So there, in our minds, like a wild connection to nature is definitely part of it. But I think it's also they have a cosmology. Pretty typically, they understand where they're at in the world, and they have a tribal, community-based identity structure and story. They know where they come from. They know what they're trying to do, and they have people around them that are caring for those same cultural values. And I think that's also very important as well.
That is yeah, it's an amazing story, actually, isn't it? And as you say, again, the Western world, we've gone down the path of kind of medicine, really, to a certain degree, and everything is, very kind of fixed in terms of dates, times. Again, if you're kind of a few weeks past your due date, then generally you'd be put in for a cesarean section, I'm guessing, which would
Yeah.
be a normal
Or
thing to
induced
do.
maybe.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
induced, which again, I'm assuming the indigenous don't do those sort of things. Do they do things like cesareans, or are they still very kind
Mhm.
of um, not old fashioned, but working in the older traditions, the older ways of birth?
I can't speak for all of them. There are certainly some communities that are closer to hospitals that are not so remote, where you might have a mix of both. But at least a lot of the tribes that we work with are very rooted in doing things as naturally as possible. In fact, the Gabriel, the elder that I talked about, him and his wife Josefa are both the doulas, and they're my wife and I get pregnant, we're going to be using them to deliver our child as naturally as possible. What you said there before, though, is actually quite interesting. When you said we have medicine dialed, I think it depends on your definition of medicine. I think we've got symptom management dialed. Interestingly, my wife is actually a physician here in Colombia, and so she studied the Western medical system, obviously, as her career, and then additionally a lot of Chinese herbal and ancient medicine to kind of round out a more holistic view of things. And based on our conversations and my general observations, I think the Western medical system typically treats symptoms. You got a headache, pop an Advil, you know. And it's really good at that. It's not to say that it's complete bunk or that it's not necessary. I think both systems, holistic health, indigenous and ancestral health, and wisdom and understanding of medical issues, as well as Western medical issues, can both play a part. It's not one or the other. I think it's both in combination. And I think what indigenous typically focus on when it comes to medicine is prevention and root cause versus symptom management.
Yeah, which makes total sense, doesn't it? It's going back to the old way of doing things, really. And I think that
Yeah.
is the problem again, that the Western medical system is, as you say, symptom based. Like one of the things I always find quite interesting. Again, I'm quite spiritual, obviously psychic medium, that kind of thing. Talking to spirit guides quite often, they kind of my guy Chen laughs quite a lot at kind of the current medical methods, if you like, because again, like he
Mhm.
said, you go and see a doctor, they never ask you what you eat because they're not trained in
Exactly.
nutrition, so they don't understand
Yeah.
nutrition. They can't talk about nutrition, but nutrition is the core part of what makes us effectively. So if you eat badly every day, then you're going to exhibit physical problems and symptoms that come from the food. So treating it from a kind of pharmaceutical perspective isn't actually dealing with the problem, of course. And I think this is the big disease really in the current Western world, that food is the problem. Yet everyone's looking
Yeah.
at disease and other types of problems, but effectively it's coming from what people eat generally. Is and so how do the indigenous eat differently? is it completely different still, or do they kind of incorporate some type of Western food into their diet, or is it still kind of a very exclusively separate thing, I guess, really?
Well, some of them do incorporate Western food into their diet. It really depends on the tribe we're talking about and their location. So, for example, some tribes have either moved closer to city centers or city centers have kind of encroached into the jungle or farther up into the mountaintops. Um, the Wiwa, for example, they're on the northeastern coast of Colombia. A lot of their community is still way up in the mountains, so they're eating more traditionally. That would be like fish when they can get it, a lot of yuca, a lot of starches. Down in the jungle, a lot of them are still hunting for themselves. And that is kind of combined with more traditional Western fare. But I'd say in general, a lot of them are still very connected with this idea of food coming from the land and cared for the people that are going to eat it. So everything's like closer to source. And also the energetic properties of food. They're also, many of them are looking at that as well. If someone's sick or someone's, got an imbalance in nutrition, they're looking at that from a spiritual aspect, not just like okay, you need your B12 vitamins aspect.
Yeah, right. And that again is the kind of big difference, isn't it, really? Again, when we think about if we think about ourselves as a kind of physical body, we know that we've got the spiritual vibratory frequency as well, etheric field. So when we ingest food, obviously we're ingesting a frequency. So, again, with my kind of perspective, if we ingest food that's been slaughtered in a bad way, particularly, or we think about the kind of Western way to do things, animals are kind of queued up into some sort of processing plant, I guess, really.
Yeah,
And they're
quite
in fear.
horrible.
Yeah, they're in a huge amount of fear, aren't they? And that fear and adrenaline is in their blood, and then of course that's coursing around their body. So when they eventually have their life taken and then they're processed, the meat that we then eat from the supermarket shelves has got that low fear-based vibration, which I'm guessing is different in the way the indigenous, because I guess they still respect the animal, and I'm guessing there's some type of traditional way of doing that. Is there when they actually slaughter something and then eat the meat effectively?
Yeah, I would say in general, I would say in general, honestly, and I try to avoid blanket statements like this a whole lot, but in general, the Western culture doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to the consciousness or state of animals or foodstuffs. We're all about mass production. And so when you're living in a particular area, you've got to be really conscious about, okay, are we over harvesting a particular animal or a particular plant? We've got to look at the overall balance, which is a lot of what Indigenous will tell you. Balance in everything, balance in harvesting, balance in hunting. A lot of times they'll use the medicine or talk to the spirit of the particular animal that they want to go hunt for permission beforehand, right? So it's a
Right.
completely different worldview and understanding of the ecology and how we fit inside of it.
So that's kind of really interesting for me from a kind of spiritual and psychic perspective. So the indigenous, would that be elders that are connecting to their spiritual ancestors to kind of gain a connection to that spiritual animal, or are they actually connecting to the archetype, I guess, of the animal that they're about to hunt effectively?
I've heard both. So I've had personal stories told to me of both, and also a third one, which is the tribes that use, say, ayahuasca or other psychedelic medicines will often connect with the spirit of that medicine and know where the animals are, right? I've seen this happen before. So there's a third element. So there's asking the ancestors and other spirit guides. There's asking the actual archetype and spirit of the animal itself, and then there's also using the sacred medicines or plant medicines that the tribe uses to find out when and where and how to hunt.
Wow, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, that is, yeah. So I guess again, from an indigenous perspective, are the children taught to connect to spirit guides and use telepathy to talk to guides, ancestors in that way from an early age, or is that something they develop as they get older, really?
It's actually something we're exploring right now with our elders. We're kind of going through the cosmology of each tribe and how they train their children. The Wiwa, and I haven't completely explored this, but I'll give you my understanding of where they're at the moment. Oftentimes, the Wiwa will identify spiritual leaders early in childhood and then sequester those children for many, many years, like maybe 7 years. They'll go live up in caves. They'll just immerse themselves in nature to learn how to have those conversations. We're currently exploring two aspects of how the tribes speak to animals. One is like the understanding of the energy and how, like, okay, that's a ferret, and the ferret represents this, and here's how you talk to the ferret, and here's what it represents. also the dream aspect of that, because what I was really excited to learn is that the Morui culture and the Wiwa culture, and these are the two cultures we're working with at the minute, both interpret dreams differently, but they also work with dreams, like in an active and a passive sense. So like one of the Wiwa was talking about how they connect with the animal spirits and the spirits surrounding a pregnancy to make sure that the child is not only going to be born healthy, but also work on educating the child in the process of gestation. So I can't give you the answer of how they specifically train their children. Other than that, I know it's there, but we haven't dug that out yet.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I guess this is where I'm interested. We obviously work spirit guides and telepathic. It took me years to learn to connect to my guide Chen and be able to do the things that I do now, really, in terms of channeling spirits. So they kind of trance channel. The spirit guide comes in, talks through you, that kind of thing. And then we look at our children and think children should be being taught protection, psychic and spiritual protection.
Yeah.
I believe, and Jane and I are kind of working on spinning up workshops for people that have got kind of children that are spiritual to actually educate them in these are the things they need to think about their own protection, how they put themselves in a kind of golden bubble and make it fun, and again protecting from negative energies, entities, that kind of thing. And I guess that kind of
Yeah.
leads into ayahuasca really, because again, as part of the work that we do, we're obviously clearing negative energies every day from people. It's what we do basically. And quite a lot of people go to ayahuasca retreats and things and then come back with entities attached. Quite a lot of them are effectively, possessed or have self-harm. Some of them are schizophrenic, some of them are kind of suicidal, after they've been to some of these retreats. And this, I guess, is part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, really, because I thought it'd be great to get your version of what's probably going wrong, I guess, when people do that from a recreational perspective. Are they kind of coming into a retreat with the wrong energy, the wrong intention, or is it the kind of retreat and the people that run them maybe aren't protecting these people in the right way? Does that kind of make sense to you from your
Yeah,
view?
absolutely. Yeah, I want to take a brief stroll down memory lane here, or at least what we have in the records. Sorry for the motorcycle passing by. At least what we have in the anthropological records. Within the last couple of hundred years, ayahuasca itself has been used in at least three different major formats. It used to be where the shaman would take ayahuasca for the patients. So instead of everybody taking ayahuasca, the shaman or taita, the medicine worker, would take ayahuasca for the patients and heal on their behalf. The Western model is now a little bit different. Now we all take it together. Now, before that, way before that, the taitas would take ayahuasca to war with other tribes. So in the Western world, we think of like ayahuasca as this like, completely benevolent plant spirit. And I'm going to piss off a lot of people by saying this, but I think it can be used for both. What I kind of attribute it to is like a nuclear bomb or nuclear material. You can make a bomb with it that's used for destruction, or you can make it a generator, right, to produce electricity. So positive and negative. It has both of those abilities. And I do believe it's conscious and I do believe it loves humanity, but I think that people can also use it for their own benefit and not necessarily the benefit of everybody. Now, what you said before about children, before I finish the rest of the answer, is also really important because what happens if we find a spiritually sensitive or open kid, maybe with gifts nowadays? We put them on drugs or lock them up in a mental hospital, right? That's also something that differs in the tribes. And I think that what you're doing is really, really important so that we don't damage sensitive young people, but instead can train them how to protect themselves. Now, on to your answer or your question about ayahuasca. So, right now, there are a lot of people that want to take ayahuasca, and a lot of people are using that as a business opportunity. To become a taita, to become a shaman, to someone that knows how to work with this medicine, requires many, many, many years of dedicated study with elders that have carried this tradition. There are currently places like in Peru that you can go down, a Westerner can fly down, take 3 nights of ayahuasca, and come away with a certificate to serve the medicine. In our view, that is grossly negligent and deeply sacrilegious to the point of blasphemy, right? Now, when I say our view, my view, we really, really think that's very dangerous. And an additional part is I think that you're right. When we started giving medicine to Western people with no understanding of the cosmology or the way to work with those medicines or like the general life that surrounds them, it's very dangerous because it's kind of like imagine sending a spiritually open kid in to talk with entities when he or she doesn't know even how to protect himself. And I think that's very important. So yeah, the retreat center of we're going to monetize the sacred medicine, I think corrupts it. People that are not ready and not qualified to serve, that's also a very bad thing and dangerous. Like people need to have a lot more responsibility surrounding how they serve the medicine. And also people have no understanding of the basics of spiritual and energetical concepts that would protect themselves. I think those will probably be the 3 points of that answer.
Yeah, I'm glad you've covered that, Scotty. It's a really important thing, I think, that, as you say, a lot of these kind of ancient traditions do tend to get corrupted because they become monetized. So again, you
Yeah.
look back in time and you think people probably used ayahuasca in the right way, went to the right retreat with the right people, and it was always I always thought it was a shamanic journey really more than anything else. So the people I've spoken to that have been to credible places talk about it being a kind of uplifting, completely opening experience that you basically out on the astral. You get to meet other energies, entities, etc. You can talk to other energies and entities psychically, and it's quite a magnificent experience, really. But
Yeah.
again, like
It
everything,
it
isn't it?
often is.
Yeah, and I can imagine that that would be where you would want people to be, really. But of course, like everything, things, do get corrupted because then you do get people that are looking to monetize the experience and just make it into, a money-making venture, and then obviously disregard some of the, I guess, the right journey in terms of the understanding about what they're about to do, why they're there to do it in the first place, maybe the experience they're going to have, and also the protective aspect. Because when you're dealing with spirit, we know that spirits are real, spirits exist, and we know that there are positive and negative ones. So people that are coming on these journeys that don't have the understanding are kind of like children, playing in a
Yeah,
pool of crocodiles, really, to a certain degree. Is that your
exactly.
opinion?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think what you mentioned there actually made me think of a possible fourth answer to that question, which is yes, you are very open when you finish a ayahuasca retreat. And even if you prepared well, and even if you understand a little bit, and even if the people there have the highest intention possible, where do you go afterwards? Because you're still open for a period of time after that. So imagine you've got like you just went to the hospital and got a cut stitched up and they put antibiotics on it, but you go jump into a dirty pool right after that. It's kind of the equivalent of if you get done with an ayahuasca retreat and you go to nature, you're surrounded with people that care about you, you're very careful about what's entering your field psychically, energetically, spiritually, emotionally. Great. But if you go to a bar or an airport or go right home and just go from the jungle and a protected, safe, sterile environment to somewhere that's not, that's also dangerous. And as much as we try to say people like, hey, really calm, like slow down and go to a place or stay here where you can complete that healing process, that covering up, that closing process before you go out into the real world, despite what we try, like people will still go right back into a bar and start chugging beers. But yeah, hey, that could be
And I
another
guess that is
possibility.
people's path, isn't it? That's an experience that people, whatever's on our path is what we're going to walk, and that's the experience that we're going to have. So again, if you haven't done your homework, I guess, and don't really understand what you're doing, then you do run that risk effectively. So I mean, I'm quite interested in the whole ayahuasca experience. So could you take me through the journey? So if I was to contact you guys to have center and we kind of have a conversation, what would that journey look like really from the moment that we kind of connect to, how I kind of turn up in Colombia and then what
Yeah.
happens from there on in? Because I think lots of people, I know we have lots of people talking to us on a kind of daily basis. And ayahuasca is a very big conversation. So that was why I was so keen to talk to you to get the first hand real version of what happens and how that experience looks really.
Yeah. I'll describe the ideal version and then I'll kind of walk you through that. At the moment, we're not offering retreats or immersions or ceremonies at the moment. The medicine has told us to operate in this idea of community and education first. But I'll talk about maybe a year from now, if and when we do open up more immersions. Immersions is our idea of the ceremony. If you come in for a retreat, it's kind of like you're coming in as a patient, you're broken, you're sick, you come in, you get healed, you leave. And we want to uproot that model. We want to operate in more of a community-based model where imagine you're in an indigenous village and you're talking, they're like, hey, Taita, I've had some bad dreams recently, or I'm struggling with some depression. Like, can I come in and take ceremony with you tonight? He's like, sure, yeah, open it up. He says, hey, by the way, everybody in the village, we're having ceremony. Come on over. Now, the difference there is that they know everybody. They work together. They've communicated. They know the backstories. And there's also accountability, meaning that in a small indigenous village, you can't go up and backhand somebody in the face and get away with it. But you probably could do that in New York City, where nobody's going to see you again. You don't know the guy that you just hit, right? So we're trying to do that model online. So right now, you just come into our free community. We've got a whole bunch of courses. We are talking to elders. We're recording those conversations and outlining the cosmology so that people can understand before they get into it if this is a good medicine for them, and if they do still feel called to it, what's the right way to prepare? Which is not like, oh, I don't need to take coffee 3 days before. It's not the systematic checklist. It's the how am I aligning myself with the energy of this plant, and am I coming in with a humble mind and the idea of being a student? And then after that, when I go home, if the medicine shows me something I need to work on in my life, am I going to actually do that? So that's the preparation aspect. And there's the integration aspect, which is maybe more important, which is when you go home, what habits are you changing in your life? And who do you have to talk to? Because part of integration is what did the medicine tell me to do and what did I just go through? The other part is I understand what I need to do now, like I need to fix my diet. Now I have to do that. And those both points, preparation and integration, are very important. And what we imagine is if we just build community and just help people, if they want to go and take medicine somewhere that either that they've selected or that we can refer them to, amazing. In the future, we want to run immersions, which is our community, our indigenous community here in Colombia, will every month or so open up. We'll bring our Taita out of the jungle. We will pray together as a community like the village does. And then if people that are in good relationship with our community that we know, we like, we trust, we've identified, don't have any contraindications, they're not on antidepressants, they don't have schizophrenic tendencies, we have a good feel about them, we've been able to spend time with them, then come on down and you're praying with family and community as opposed to coming into this idea of like, I'm a patient and I've got to do something extreme like ayahuasca to fix me. And in closing, the thing that a lot of people realize is that they come in thinking they need ayahuasca, but if they just focus on the basics, food, diet, sleep, exercise, energy, relationships, oftentimes they don't need it because ayahuasca is not the medicine. We are the medicine. Each of us individually, the medicine in community, the medicine in the spoken word. And I think a lot of people don't know that, which is why we're trying to educate them.
And that's a really good point. I didn't know that myself, actually. I kind of assumed that people that chose to do ayahuasca, there were two versions of those people. One was the recreational, it's almost like an LSD type experience, really, where I can go and do ayahuasca, do a detox effectively, and then have an experience, a kind of spiritual psychic experience for a number of days. And then the other side of that was the people that have different challenges, probably not mental health challenges, but as you said, anxiety, depression, other things. Maybe they're looking for a different answer in their life, or going through difficult challenges, or maybe been through, loss or despair, those sorts of things, and then think, okay, I need to get answers. How can I do that? So again, in my mind, there was these two kind of versions of people looking for that experience. So in terms of when you take ayahuasca, what would that journey look like? Is
It
it
depends on
just
well, first of all, it depends on the tribe in terms of the overall ceremony structure. I'll give you kind of like an amalgamated idea, average view of what that might look like. The experience itself is going to depend on each person and it's going to differ every time, every night. Even if you take the same medicine with the same person 4 nights in a row, each one of those experiences are almost certainly going to be very completely different. It's wild. But pretty generally, you're going to take the medicine in a ceremonial setting and you're going to go into a period of silence. Depending on the tribe, it might be an hour, it might be 3 hours, it might be 6 hours, but you're going to have some sort of silence where you're just sitting there, usually in the dark, and you're connecting with the medicine and connecting with yourself. Then, when the Taita or the shaman decides, the fire will be brought up a little bit, music might start, Icaros might start, the ways that the leaders of the ceremony facilitate and guide the experience and work with the energy of the medicine and also everyone else's energy. So in an ayahuasca experience, you kind of think like I'm sitting down on my blanket, like do my own thing. Your energy and your experience is actually feeding into everyone else's experience. You're sort of co-creating the ceremony with people. And that usually lasts around until, at least in the Colombian tradition, generally around 4, 4:30, 5 in the morning. Maybe the suns just started to come out, and at that point, the Taita usually does an energetic clearing that does the best work. It's kind of like, again, sewing up the wound. Everybody's super open and like, oh, and the Taita does work to kind of close up everybody energetically and bless them before they move into the new day. That will be like more or less an average experience. But in that experience, man, you could have everything from uh, terrifying fear to abundant love and joy, everything in between, and sometimes all of those at the same time. You could see visions, you could sort of know things. Like I rarely see visions in ayahuasca. Most people go into this and think, I'm going to see visions. I almost never see visions, but I have sort of what's the word when you sort of know things? It's
Yeah, cognition basically. It's
cognitions.
cognitive, yeah.
Cognitions. Yeah, I have cognitions. So the medicine speaks to me sort of directly through my mind. And the medicine speaks to people in many different ways. And what we've done is we talk to different elders and explore these different topics, and we put those into our free course so people can like really go into this. But that's the best average answer I think I can give you.
Yeah, perfect. Well, again, like you say, it's different for everybody, isn't it? And so,
Yeah.
is your understanding that when you take the medicine, you connect to the energy of the medicine, and then you kind of move on to the astral. So, if I'm doing like a meditation, or I'm connecting to my guide and doing things psychically, I would do my psychic protection, put myself in a bubble, check my sovereignty, make sure there's nothing negative connected, and then I know at that point I'm clean and clear, and then psychically I can put my conscious awareness wherever I want that to be, whether it's like remote viewing or just leaving or scanning something or connecting to another energy or connecting to an entity to have a conversation. Is it the same type of thing as that?
Yeah, I'll answer this from my perspective. So imagine like a plane, right? The plane flies, and I can understand a little bit of the Bernoulli effect. The air passing over the wings at different rates creates an uplift, and I understand a little bit of how the motor works. And maybe if you move a flap, the aircraft moves. I'm starting to like move the flaps a little bit in my own personal practice. I can't understand everything that's possible in the medicine, but I can tell you there was a Netflix documentary about a plane that went down and several kids were lost in the jungle for a while. They searched for these kids for like 3 weeks, and they finally went to an indigenous tribe that said, sit down here, let's take some medicine. They took some medicine. They used the medicine and either the spirit of the medicine or the spirit of the forest, I'm not exactly sure what, to find the children. They found the children the next day. Those things are possible. It's possible to use ayahuasca to hunt. It's possible to use ayahuasca to do energetic and psychic healing. It's possible to use it on your own. It's possible to cure injuries. I've seen that happen and actually, cured injuries of my own from that. So all those things are possible. Exactly how it works, I would have to talk to an elder on that. But I know those things are possible. And what I've seen in my own life is if you take ayahuasca a couple of times, it's kind of like you've been thrown into the deep end of the pool and no one has told you how to tread water yet. And then you start to get the ability to tread water. Like, okay, I can exist in this space. I can walk around a little bit. I can maybe influence it a little bit one way or the other, while still respecting the fact that you're in the deep end. And then maybe you start to swim. And so I'm kind of in between treading water and starting to swim in my personal practice. So I wouldn't be the right person to explain exactly how it works on an energetic level, but I can tell you those things do exist, those abilities, and I've seen it happen.
Right, amazing. So it does sound, doesn't it, like from a spiritual perspective, you're connecting to a conscious energy, basically that
Yeah.
has consciousness, basically, and that's what you're integrating with, communicating with, and talking to. And I guess that's what kind
Yeah.
of shamans and those sorts of people did in the old days in that kind of indigenous space. So would there be a kind of like a core practitioner, like a core shaman that runs those things, or is that taught and handed down from kind of generation to generation?
Two answers to this question. The first and most common answer is that it's handed generation to generation. There's not only a transference of power, but also a transference of deeply held and deeply respected knowledge that you really have to earn. Becoming a Taita isn't something, it's part being born into it and part having the dedication, discipline to really pursue that path for a long period of time. It's not something that's handed to people. Like I get a lot of people that message me like, "Hey, I want to be a shaman." Like, I'm sorry, man, we're not the place to help you. Um, Part of because what I mentioned before is we have to have a real responsibility and understanding of the work that we're doing with people. I was actually handed my first medicine altar several years ago with an elder that I was apprenticing, and I didn't take it seriously enough. And I did things in a non-ceremonial way, and a friend of mine ended up with nightmares for several weeks afterwards. So like I literally damaged one of my friends by not taking the responsibility on myself enough to hold space properly. So that said, that's the first answer and the only answer most people will get. If you're on your path, I've been told by some that if you're under the tutelage of a taita or a shaman and he or she trusts you and is willing to extend that protection to you and gives you some medicine, another way to learn it, if you don't have it passed down to you by an ancestor, is to just take a lot of medicine in a semi-controlled environment, whether that's on your own or in ceremonies. That's another way to do it. But again, not for everybody. And I'm going to put a giant asterisk on that, saying like, do not take medicine at home or brew your own ayahuasca. Go talk to the elders for God's sake and learn it the right way.
Yeah, and again, that kind of comes on to the whole spiritual protection conversation, I guess, really, in terms of when we're doing these things and we're working in these different spaces, certainly the kind of psychic and spiritual spaces, then there are other energies and entities that exist on those spaces that obviously we're going to get to connect with, to deal with, and have problems with. So, is there like a protective, do you guys do like a protective kind of meditation or some sort of protection before people take the medicine, or is the medicine part of the journey in that way, really?
Well, the medicine is a large part of it. A lot of things go into it. It's very deep study in science here. So the who brews the medicine, where the medicine comes from, and the intentions and prayers that are put over that medicine. So oftentimes the taita will cook for several days just alone, taking medicine. The medicine tells the taita when it's ready. That initial period is very important for the protection of everybody else that takes that medicine. You could think of it like, are you making iced tea with like sewer water or are you making it with like pristine filtered water? The ingredients and intention that go into it, very important. Also, from an energetic perspective, the people that are helping the taita or in service go to great lengths to make sure that the space is energetically protected. So when we built our maloka, which is our it's a 15 meters by 15 meters round structure, so octagonal, and we actually asked the land and the spirits of the land before we did that if it was okay to build it, and then we planted many protective plants like borrachero around that, coca, tobacco, so that those plants can guard the space. And before and after and during ceremonies, we use copal, which is a cleansing. You probably are familiar with copal.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a cleansing resin. So that plus the prayers of the taita, plus the work that went into the medicine, plus the music that we play in the ceremony, because in ceremony I'm a medicine musician. And so we work with the spirits in a very wonderful way, which is we view the songs that we sing, which are kind of, they're not kind of, they are ayahuasca and Yagé songs that have been derived from the medicine given to us or to others. And there are spirits that are attached for that, that are like ally spirits. And so in a particular ceremony, the taita might request a song or tell us when to play or tell us when not to play. And we as musicians have some flexibility to understand, okay, what songs to play based on what spirits we need to bring in because of what the people in the ceremony need. So there's multiple levels of protection, if that makes sense, and sort of space holding that are going on at the same time.
yeah. That's really interesting. So you're kind of doing the same thing, aren't you? You're actually invoking spiritual energies basically as part of the kind of experience to hold the space, as you said, really, and provide that kind of spiritual protection. And I guess that's maybe,
Exactly.
from my perspective, is really interesting to hear that, because I guess that's probably what's not happening in some of these kind of other retreats that you talked about, whereby it's seen as more of a kind of recreational, maybe sort of money making venture, I guess, where people
Yeah.
don't get protected, and then of course they end up going home, as you said, with attachments basically, and then we kind of get to hear that people are in quite a bad way generally with intrusive thoughts, voices, negative attachments, or as you said, I think horrifying dreams and nightmares that we probably see one or two a week of people that are coming back from these sorts of retreats, that things aren't being done particularly well, or maybe they're not holding their own protection in high enough regard. Maybe is that what you would think? It's more of a retreat problem, do you think, or is it kind of a
Well,
combination of the retreat and maybe the
it's
teaching?
I'd say a combination, honestly. I don't want to blame any one factor, especially harshly. I think it's a combination, and it could be one or more or all of the things. I don't think that every retreat that's running is bad, and obviously we have to make money, we have to live. So I'm not saying that everyone that charges for the medicine is bad either. It is very difficult to keep things um, clean in that sense, though. Yeah, I think it's all those things. I think it's people's preparation. I think it's sometimes then I've experienced personally the medicine can kind of get angry with you if you treat it not in a way that's sacred or really intentional. Early on in my medicine walk, I started taking a lot of ceremonies because it was kind of a cool thing to do. Like, oh yeah, I'm Scotty living in Colombia, just going to ceremony after ceremony. And that's one of the things that we caution people against, which we call the commoditization gap, which is what happens when you view this experience as like something you're paying for. Like, I'm going to go to the doctor's office and I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to get healed. It's kind of like walking into the top diabetes specialist in the world, and he says, you should stop eating sugar. Okay, thanks, doc. I'll be back next week. And you're cramming Skittles down your face the next day. That has a lot to do with it. Yeah, it's a combination of all those things, man. And one of the reasons why we're trying to do things in a slower, more mindful way that's connected more with our indigenous lineages, because these cultures have kept the use of this medicine safe for many thousands of years. And now with Westerners coming in and a lot of more people, a lot of press, a lot of people coming in trying it for the first time, it's opening to problems and challenges that we need more awareness of at the very least.
That's something I was going to ask you actually, which is really good that you've got onto that point. Is, as it becomes more, as you said, commoditized really, and more of a kind of recreational experience for people, especially people that are struggling with their life and the things that they're going through, and people that are having challenges in different ways. It's like, oh, I can go off and do ayahuasca, that'd be a great thing, almost like a holiday. So are the shamans and the indigenous worried about kind of the Western corporations coming in and trying to make it a holiday, sort of busman's holiday affair, really? I guess they can't do that because they wouldn't have the shamanic and elder connection, but I guess they potentially could at some point.
Yeah, it's still possible to get ayahuasca in other places. You can probably find it online. Please don't. But it's certainly possible to get the components. It's possible to mix it yourself to figure out a YouTube video somewhere. And people are doing that. There are also people that are not as ethically connected with the medicine that would sell it to, say, someone that they don't know, like, or trust. That's happening. And I can tell you from personal experience that there is these indigenous cultures have done us a great service in terms of just sharing this with us. If we look at the indigenous cultures in the US, for example, many of them are very hesitant to share their songs or the peyote medicine or their traditions and culture with us because of what happened just a couple of generations ago. And within the cultural memory, what happened with Western encroachment and colonization and Christianity is still very present. And so these elders leaving the jungle and carrying the sacred medicine, not only to us in Colombia, but also to the States and traveling to Europe, is an incredible gift. And part of our education is about helping people understand that, not about being like, oh, I'm white, like I can't do anything. No, it's not about like wokeism, but it is about a legitimate understanding of the incredible responsibility these taitas are bringing with them and the incredible love that they have for us to share these things, even knowing that it occasionally and sometimes gets misused.
And I think there's always going to be that problem, isn't there? Everything gets misused sometimes and in different ways. So where do you guys kind of see us moving, really? I know we know from kind of a world perspective. I kind of see things almost like a crossroads now. From my perspective, the way that I kind of see the world is you've got a crossroads. Some of us are becoming more spiritual. People like yourselves and ourselves really going down the spiritual route. Other people are kind of veering down the tech and AI and the kind of, incorporating technology into their bodies and minds and that kind of stuff. So where do you guys kind of see this moving? Do you see that it's almost like Avatar, if you've seen the Avatar films,
Yeah,
that
I
you
have.
guys are like the kind of natives, really, and indigenous, still connected to nature, still trying to uphold and keep that part of the spiritual connection, and then effectively you've got the people that are coming in that are trying to take that over and move things into a more technical perspective.
Yeah. With Avatar, the latest movie, or not the latest, but the second one, the Way of Water, one of these pipes, a tepi pipe, was used to apply a substance to one of, I think Jake was the main character in the movie. And for us, most people attributed that to either representing rapé, which is primarily tobacco based, or yopo or something like that, which yopo is a bark of an Amazonian tree that contains DMT. In any case, a lot of elements were really, really interestingly pointing towards Amazonian spirituality there. So where do I see people going? Well, there's this prophecy across many indigenous tribes called the Eagle and Condor prophecy. This is in the Hopi, this is in the Lakota, this is in the Keru traditions down south in Peru. A lot of different traditions are pointing to this idea of the eagle and condor. So what's that? The eagle represents the north, technology, vision, and ability for scale. The condor represents the south, which is the heart, the tradition, the center, the energetic work. And the idea is that both of those birds will fly together, meaning that we will find a way to use technology to reconnect us to ourselves and to our ancestors. Because I think what's happening is like what's happening now in the US. Mushrooms are becoming more available. Ketamine therapy is on every street. You can buy medical marijuana wherever you want it. And people are still frustrated because the medicines are not going to fix you. The only thing that's going to fix you is the habits and the things that you do in your life, the work that you do. And that takes sacrifice and patience. And people are not prepared for that because our entire culture has been gearing us up for and training us to expect on demand. I want to watch a movie when I want. No, I want the headache to go away. It doesn't matter if I'm drinking enough water. I just want the headache to go away. So like quick fixes. And that's making us sick. So I think that what's happening is people are realizing, okay, all these things that I've been trying is not working. I'm still unhappy. I can go to an ayahuasca ceremony and I can see consciousness, and I can go back to my old life and realize that nothing's changed and feel depressed. So I think people are looking for a way to connect with things that actually do work, which is community and habit change and advice from our elders. And I was talking with one of our elders 2 weeks ago, and I said, "Hey, man, why are you doing this with us?" He said, "Well, 7 or 8 generations ago, our people, to escape from the Spanish, went way up to the mountains, and we did several generations of energetic work there. And then we got together as a tribe and said, well, things are not going well for people down there. They're still disrespecting nature. So we've got to do something about that." So they started educating their children how to speak Spanish. They created their own school system that was 70% their cultural education and 30% Spanish education. This is the Wiwa tribe in particular. And they came back down off the mountain and started integrating themselves into society, which is how our elder found us. And he said, "Scottie, I had a dream 10 years ago when I was first starting on my path of being a real spiritual leader. And in the dream, my ancestor showed me that I had this camera. It was like a real fancy camera. And she's like, "You don't know how to take pictures yet." He's like, "Yeah, I know how to take pictures. You click the button, boom, it happens." She's like, "No, you really don't know how to do it, but to reach people far away." And so she showed him in the dream how to press a button that would make the lens zoom out so he could see people from very, very far away. And he said, "Scottie, I didn't understand the significance of that dream until we started talking. Right now, we're on he's up way up in his territory in the mountaintops off of the cell signal. I'm in Medellin and we're talking to people in the US. He's like, this is what the dream meant. I've now learned how to use technology to zoom out and see people very, very far away." And so that's what's happening if we use it correctly, meaning if we, with heart and with intention and with ethical boundaries, raise indigenous voices to where they can reach the people that really need it, which is, hey, man, you don't need ketamine therapy. You don't need ayahuasca. You don't need anything other than just sitting down and listening to your own heart. All of those things that I mentioned can be helpful along your path, but they're not the end all be all. There is no substance on earth ever that will fix your trauma. You got to do that, but it doesn't mean you have to do it alone. And there are tools available depending on what resonates with you. And so that's where I see things going. The combination of technology and ancestral wisdom to bring people back into their bodies, back into their spirits, back into an understanding of their gifts, and also the things that they've gone through in life so they can heal for real in community like we should.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way to kind of frame the whole picture, really, is that, again, I think as a Western world, we've gone so far down the kind of disengagement route. Everyone's isolated now, and people feel so bad because they're on their own. And like you say, everyone's
Yeah.
turning to the internet and to kind of virtual things to try to get a connection to people like them, but they don't really find it in the same way. Whereas talking to people that you live with in your community is trying to build that connection, and sitting with someone real and having a laugh and a chat is very different from any other method of doing that, really. And I think, like you say, certainly by the time we get to sort of midway through our lifetime, by the time you hit 40 and onwards, most people have been through traumas, most people have been through stress, most people have had addictions, as you said, and been through challenges, etc. So I don't think anyone gets off lightly, really. And the older you get, the more history you've got, But the more wisdom you've got, and the more I think you start to realize that for you to find that inner peace, you have to turn inside and stop looking outside. And as you say,
Exactly.
trying to find a quick fix, we know it just doesn't work. It's kind of like
Yeah.
nobody gets rich quick. The sort of get rich quick schemes don't work, and we kind of know that as we get older. When you're younger, you can be convinced that that works, but as you get older, you kind of realize it doesn't. And I think there is that aspect now that spirituality is coming online. People are becoming more spiritually aware, and I think there's more of an understanding that we do live in this space where we've got our physical container, but we are connected spiritually and energetically to our ancestors, spirits basically. There are good and bad ones, but also to nature. And, when we walk through a wood, we can talk to trees, we can connect to trees, we can put
Yeah.
thoughts out to animals and connect to animals and ask for things to happen with archetypes of different animals energetically. And I think the younger generation are going to kind of bring that forward. It feels to me like, so my generation, I'm kind of like nearly 60, so my generation have kind of not done that particularly well. But I think the new generation coming in seem to be very connected to energy, really, and they seem to be energetically aligned, which is why we're seeing some of these kind of behavioral patterns with children that get kind of, labeled ADHD, or they've got some sort of syndrome. But have they got a syndrome, or are they just very different and they're very connected to spirit and they actually work in a different way? Is that how you would see things?
Yeah. I think that in general, people are becoming very much more open than we used to be in the past. And I think psychedelics are a really wonderful way to open up people's minds, like mine, that were skeptical. I didn't believe any, I was an atheist. I didn't believe in any deity or spirits at all. I just kind of poo-pooed all that stuff until I started experimenting with Vipassana meditation, LSD, and MDMA. And those things opened up my mind in ways that I didn't really understand what was happening. One of the first people that I was listening to that convinced me that taking psychedelics was maybe worth considering was a guy called Sam Harris. He's a neuroscientist. He's one of the four horsemen of atheism. He's currently taken a real political turn in the last couple of years of his work, which I'm not super fan of. But he had a podcast that his first podcast episode was drugs and the meaning of life. And his postulation, kind of talking about or considering these ideas of consciousness and, medicines, was like, well, I think that it's possible to feel and experience whatever you feel and experience on a particular psychedelic medicine. I think it's possible to feel that in real life. I said, okay, that's very interesting. I'm going to study this. So I would take LSD, I would take MDMA, and I would, like a giant nerd, as much as I was possible, like write down and remember what I was experiencing and feeling. And I remember the first time I tried MDMA, which I was very resistant to initially because of its kind of party drug type reputation. I remember going in to a club that I was at the time, and I was ordering water because I wasn't drinking at that time. I had taken a sober break. So I ordered a bottle of water and I went back, an hour or two later, and this bartender remembered my name. He's like, Scotty, hey man, you back for another bottle of water? And I was like completely blown away. I was like, how is this guy remembering my name? Like what enormous care that this guy took, just something very small. And I said, interesting. Okay. Why don't I feel that way in life, in my normal waking consciousness? I might be a bit of an asshole. So I started exploring those things. And I think psychedelics, not to get us too far off the question you answered or you asked, is I think psychedelics can really open our minds to those possibilities when we've closed them ourselves. With kids, the development of ADHD, Dr. Gabor Mate is a really excellent resource for this. Sometimes ADHD, and at least his frame of thinking, could come from traumatic experiences as a child or challenges there. And oftentimes, as you also mentioned, it could be the development of spiritual gifts or both. And so I think it's very important that we, as a society and a culture, start to understand more of why that's going on and what the markers are for spiritual gifts so that we can educate our children. So the same way that we might put them in the pool if they show early signs of swimming.
Yeah, and that's a good way to see it, I think, really. I think, again, some of these labels are given to children. Again, the Western version with that will be take a tablet, try and dull them down or disconnect them. And all you're doing then is disconnecting them from source, basically, which is their source energy. So I think, like I said, I think we're seeing like a different generation of children coming through. My spirit guide Chen says these are human version two, he calls them, where they're very connected.
Thank God. we really need it.
Yeah, we do. We do. I think version 1 needs changing. Really, it's got a lot of bugs there to get fixed. But version 2 is a different animal altogether, really. And my daughter's got well, two children now, but one of them's three, and he's got ADHD. But when I sit and talk to him, I mean, he can tell you all the planets lined up in order at 3 years old, which I couldn't do.
Wow.
I couldn't say from the sun. He can go through all the planets right out to kind of Pluto at the end. He knows which
Well,
one's Saturn.
okay, boomer. Pluto's not a planet anymore.
Exactly.
Sorry, I could resist to jab you on that one, man. I still consider Pluto as a planet for the record.
That's human version 1, but yeah. But version 2, I mean, they're very different. They're thinking differently. They're very connected differently. And, I sort of see him looking around the room, have a quick look around the room, and I kind of will look psychically and see that he's laughing and talking to spirit. He's talking to grandparents and ancestors and people. But again,
Oh, wonderful.
if you're not spiritual, you wouldn't see that. You'd assume that there's something wrong with him. But when I look, I
Yeah.
think no, he can see. He's very connected. And at 3 years old, it's kind of unbelievable, really, that they're still so psychically and spiritually turned on. And you watch, them with animals as well. They seem to be very connected, and think, wow, this is a different. These are different children that are coming through now, really, and hopefully the planet will kind of almost do like a kind of reverse turnaround. And as you said, trying to use technology in a good, positive way, connecting energetically with nature, with spirit, and trying to turn away from some of the negative choices that we've kind of been involved with through our sort of politics and governments over the years, I guess, really.
Yeah, we're making positive strides. I mean, let's take schizophrenia, which you mentioned briefly. What, 30, 40, 50 years ago? I'm not good at times, but the only solution to that was a lobotomy, right? We've got to literally pick part of somebody's brain out to dumb them down. And now we've got pills that can kind of do that to put them in a sort of comatose zombie state. There's a study that I saw, I think a couple weeks old, that saw a marked reduction in schizophrenic symptoms simply by adopting a keto diet. And so I think we're getting to this point to where we're now understanding a little bit more of the body, mind, spirit connection, which indigenous people have been familiar with and know about for a very long time. And maybe there's a way to start to harness these gifts. What I see a lot, not a lot, but a lot of times when people have these gifts that are starting to open up, some of them open up later in life, they don't have the physical grounding or body capacity to actually use them properly. And so it tends to go in directions that are not useful. It's kind of like you just got your learning permit and you hop in behind a Ferrari and you smash the gas. Like you're going right into a guardrail, man. You know? So it's this idea of like maybe there are things that we can learn to do to work with these as actual gifts and not view them as the Western world views them, which is a disorder or a malady to be picked out of the brain or to be medicated out of existence.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it, really. I mean, I did quite a lot of work with a guy called Dr. Terence Palmer, probably for 10 years, and we were studying people that have mental health problems, people that were schizophrenic, self-harming, suicidal, and just about all of them had spirit attachment as the problem in our view, really. And when we would put them through a kind of spiritual clearing and detach and remove the negative things connected, it was a step change in how they felt, how they clarity of mind, the thought process changes, they feel better, more clarity. So I think we're still getting to that point that we understand, and I guess you guys do too, really, that spirit is real and spiritual energetics are real, and therefore spirits are real. And if negative ones are connected to people, then they kind of encourage or produce negative behaviors, negative experiences. And I think is that how the kind of indigenous see things too? I'm assuming they protect their space, they protect their people, and I'm
Yeah.
guessing they understand that there are negative energies and entities that they need to be guarded from, especially from the children.
Absolutely. There was, in fact, now that you mentioned that, you had asked me earlier about how do they train their children to that. So during one of the explorations of the Murui people's understanding of dreams, they were talking about, I was like, well, what about a negative dream? Like there's a positive, there's a negative dream, there are nightmares. What is that? And like, hey, sometimes there are negative dreams. And so what we train our children to do is when they have a negative dream, the first thing that they do in the morning is they go and they talk to a tree about it to release that energy. So that's step one. And step two is go talk to the elders that are accomplished in interpreting dreams so that we can understand if there's additional spiritual cleansing to be done, or if there's some work that needs to be done, or if this is a warning or a premonition for the tribe. So, like right there in a nutshell, although it's dreams related, I think it bears true. This idea of guarding and releasing things that aren't for you, as well as going to your spiritual elders to say, hey, here's what's going on before it becomes a problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because the whole dream thing again is almost a conversation itself, Scott, isn't it? Really, that what is a
It is.
dream? Why do people have dreams? Where do we go when we have dreams? And where do we come back from? But I know from my own sort of experiences years ago when I used to have problems with negative energies and entities and things, that would always kind of be like a negative dream or a a terrifying dream. You wake up, your heart beating, sort of sweating, thinking you're about to be, eaten, chopped up, killed in some way or whatever else, and you kind of come to and you think, oh, that was a dream. But you kind of realize is it real or was it real or is there an aspect of that that was real? And quite often, I would feel things in the room. So I'd have the goosebumps, I'd have hairs on my neck. I'd know that there were spiritual energies around me that were negative that you need to protect yourself from. But again, in normal society, we don't teach anyone how to do that in the Western world, which obviously the Indigenous still do, which is why that was so interesting what you just said, that you go and see someone that knows what to do in that tribe. Because it kind of looks like, doesn't it, that the Indigenous are so far ahead of us in the Western world, really, certainly in that way.
Yeah, there's a balance that we can offer things to them as well. Like what we're doing with our elders, we compensate them. Now they can, for the first time, work remotely simply by sharing their wisdom and knowledge. They're essentially being supported monetarily for being wisdom keepers and passing on the information that they have to pass on. And so that's an example of things that we can give back to them in the same way they're giving back to us and teaching us how to live well. Because it's not about ayahuasca, it's not about any particular technique or practice or medicine. It's about simply living well in whatever frame that works for you. So like, hey, if you're trying all these things and if you're waving crystals around in the air and it works, great, keep doing that. If it doesn't, well, try something else, but maybe try looking at yourself first, and that's kind of, I think, in general, what they would say.
Yeah, I like the way you've explained that through this whole conversation, really, is that there isn't a magic fix, there isn't a magic bullet. It does come back to self-responsibility and you taking control of
Yeah.
yourself, your choices, your nutritional choices, your, medications, addictions, whatever it happens to be, everything has to start with you and you have to start to want change. I think that probably is the key to everything, really. And then, of course, there are different avenues to take to find the healing, really, because I guess what you and I are talking about is healing. How does someone heal themselves from the
Yeah,
experiences or the problems they've been through? And ayahuasca is one avenue of that, really, that is
exactly.
obviously, very well worth exploring for people that are on that journey. So in terms of people
Yeah.
getting hold of you, how are people that listen to this podcast and think, I want to speak to Scotty, how do I get hold of him? How do I talk to him? What can I do to connect to you guys, really?
Yeah, the easiest way is we have a free community. It's on School. I'll send you over the link for that. It's also on our website, OCOYAI.com. Everything we do is in the community. And it's free. So come on in, explore, get to know us, hop on a call, say hi. That's, I think, the best way. And it's not just getting a hold of me, it's getting a hold of my wife, who's a Western doctor and acupuncture and herbal specialist, and our whole other community. We have plant witches and psychic mediums and all sorts of people that are here. The idea is like, come in, find your people. So I'll send you the link. If you could include those in the show notes, that would be useful for people. They can sign up and be talking to us that day.
Perfect. That's great. Thanks, Scotty. I think that's the thing. I think the fact that you guys are making it available online, is a step change because again, lots of people can't travel. People have got financial considerations and problems, that kind of thing. So, but as you said, trying to find your tribe online now can be quite difficult. But it sounds like what you guys are doing is a new way of doing things, embracing that connection from technology to the old ways, really. I think that's where we need to go. I think as humanity, we need to get back to this connection to kind of nature and to actually respect the older people that have the wisdom that have been there, done it and know some of these old traditions that have almost been lost really. So I think what you guys are doing is amazing, and thank you for being a guest on my podcast.
Thank you,
And like you
brother.
say,
It's a real pleasure, man. Yeah, it's like just find your people, and if it's on a Zoom call, is it as good as being right in person with them? No, it's not. But unless you got the finances and resources to go move to the jungle and sit right next to an elder, the best thing to do is just hop on a call with them because they're
Mm.
available for that too. Just talk to them, develop relationships. That's what it's all about. And so we're doing our best to make it accessible to everyone, which is why like we have additional courses as well that you could purchase if you want, or all the courses unlock just by you being engaged in the community. Like over time, they just unlock for you. So it's like no one has to pay us to get the information that they need, which is kind of the point, and how we protect ourselves ethically and morally within the medicine and within the information, to give the information to people that need it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that, this is where we are. I think from a spiritual perspective, everything now needs to be embraced with integrity, really, and people speaking their truth. And I think if we all
Yeah.
speak our truth and we do that with integrity, we go back to kind of this old energy that seems to have been around a long time ago, that your elders and indigenous people connect with and come from. And again, I think the Western world needs to kind of move forward technologically, but connect to that old integrity and truth, really, that the planet kind of holds, that I think we've sort of lost the value from maybe in the past.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more, man. I really appreciate you having me on, and it was really wonderful to share my story. And I'm so grateful for the work of people like you because I've run a podcast and do run a podcast and know how much work it does to edit and set up and schedule. So thank you, man. Thank you for being open, and I hope that this conversation in some small way helps someone.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, Scotty. We'll leave it there. I'm sure we'll connect again at some point for part two, which will be good. And as you say, I'll
Let's
get you to
go.
pop over all your links and things, and we'll get them put out, and then I'll share them with you to do the same with.
Awesome,
So
brother. Looking forward
you
to it,
take
man.
care, look after yourself, and we'll catch you again.
Yes, sir. Ciao.
Cheers, mate. Bye bye.